Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I am going to share some secrets to a successful art journal page. You're not going to want to miss this tutorial. So I am using a napkin as the focal image. So don't think you need to draw. Napkins are a great source of focal images. I'm working on a 7x10 mixed media page, which is just the right size. You have room to add an interesting background and texture, but it's not too big to overwhelm you. Take off those excess plies of napkins and glue it onto copy paper. This makes it super easy to cut out. So you can build up the background. Here I'm adding some snow to the bottom of my background. I'm creating my background using different mediums. That's going to make it more interesting. Remember that focal image? Look for napkins that have two different orientations. The tree is pointing to the left, the tree is pointing to the right. This gives you options when you're setting up the composition. When you're colorizing the page, don't stick to only one color. Even if what you want is mainly blue, use 2 shades of blue or add white gesso. Here I'm using bright aqua and cobalt blue for the background. The way you put on the paint will give or add to the page. Here I'm semi-using a dry brush and I'm putting it on very messily. I'm putting it wet on wet. I'm trying really hard not to overblend. And look at all the interest this is adding to my page without any extra effort. Sometimes I use a makeup sponge. Sometimes I use my fingers. All of these are going to give a different effect. Mix it up. Try different ways of putting on the paint. Here I'm adding white gesso. White gesso is your friend. It helps blend paints, adds that all-important white space back to a page. And when you add white, you've got contrast. Now we're going to add some pattern. Stencils are a great way to add pattern. Here I'm using this Rainbow Montage stencil with Prussian blue acrylic paint. I'm applying that with a makeup sponge. I'm pressing harder in some areas and lighter in others. That's giving more variation. And notice I'm using one stencil here. You don't need to throw everything at one page. Sometimes less is more. I'm using this pattern. It's a good basic one. It's adding that swirl to it, making my job so much easier. Just make sure you don't get too much paint on the makeup sponge. There'll be a link to the stencils and the products that I use in the description box below. Loving the movement that swirl pattern has added to my sky. I'm using Shimmery Goodness. It's kind of an opalescent modeling paste, similar to stencil butters. This is from TCW. You can use modeling paste here. I'm applying it with a palette knife. It's going to make up my shimmery snow. And I'm putting it on thick. When you do that, you can build texture onto your page. You can do the same with modeling paste or thickened gesso here. Use what you have. Just a word of caution, the thicker you put on the modeling paste, shimmery goodness, stencil butter, whatever you're using, the longer it will take to dry. Now that I have a healthy portion of the shimmery goodness on this page, I'm just going to play with the palette knife, make some patterns and swirls. I can do whatever, however I want it. I end up making swirls in the snow just to mimic the swirls in the sky. The shimmery goodness stays wet for quite a while, so you have some time to play. To add more interest to the background, I'm using white acrylic paint and I'm stamping with a small scale stamp, in this case a script stamp, another good basic, and I'm just adding that to the background. I got a little carried away here, probably put a little too much of this on here. So we're back to the comment, sometimes less is more. Just be sure if you put acrylic paint on your stamps to clean them afterwards. I just spray it with Murphy's oil soap and then do a scrub. Adding white at this stage lightens and brightens the background. Yummy! Now every page needs more texture. We've got texture down below. So I'm using this, I believe it's called Star Shower stencil. And I'm going to use gold modeling paste, or I'm going to use gold stencil butter, but gold modeling paste would work as well. I want shimmer and I want texture. And I'm only going to put this in a few places. So it kind of dances across the sky. Notice how that yellow really pops against the blue background? That's because it's across the wheel from the blue. You're going to want to clean the stencil after you put modeling paste or stencil butter through it. If you don't have gold modeling paste or gold stencil butter, you can use modeling paste, then put the stencil back on and paint it with gold. There's always a workaround. But I would definitely recommend buying some gold stencil butter. When gluing on focal images that are a little thicker, use gel medium instead of fluid medium. This is the TCW brand. And I put it underneath and then I put a coat on top. That seals your focal image, be it from a magazine or printable or a napkin. Often I overpaint or tweak the colors. You don't want raw paper, even when you're shading, because that's going to bleed into the paper. So putting a coat of matte medium on top seals it, makes it non-porous. If you love gnomes, check out my gnome book digital mixed media kit at Ninny's Napkins. There's a link in the description box. Here I'm using my Inktense blocks to add color to the focal image. I'm just going to brighten it up, change the color a little bit, just so it stands out more. Remember, your focal image is what you want to see most. It needs to stand out. So sometimes doing a wash of color, like you see me doing here. The Inktense blocks are like watercolor in that you activate them with water, but they're permanent when they're done, when they're dry. And I love using the Inktense blocks as a quick way to colorize my napkin focal images and make them more my own. And now I'm colorizing the tree, just darkening the green. Colorizing it, overpainting it, also makes this look less like you've glued a napkin on and more like you've painted it. Now I'm just adding some of that white in. I've got some white paint there and I'm just dabbing it to brighten it up. I'm just following what the artist of the napkin did. Alternatively, you could use thicker gesso or even modeling paste to add texture here if you wanted. The napkin I used here is from Ninny's Napkins, and I believe it was Ho Ho Gnome. Check out all her gnome napkins. If you love gnomes, this background you could use for a lot of different types of pages. It's just a good night sky background. The finishing details always matter. Here I'm shading. This is further going to make the focal image stand out. I'll link to the video where I teach this shading technique. It's called floating acrylic, and I learned it when I learned folk art. But it allows me to use acrylic paint, which is permanent. To do this technique, you're going to need an angle brush and just your acrylic paints. I usually use black, but you can use other colors as well. Just overpainting on the areas that are black on the focal image. I just want to give the gnome a little bit more of a pink nose. Always edge the page. It frames your picture. I would say at least 90% of the time I use black, because there's usually black in on the page or on the sentiment I add to the page. Most of this video I've kept in real time, or I did not speed it up to a large degree. This page, not including drying time, because that added to the time, to be honest, but not including dry time, was just over 30 minutes. So you don't have to spend a lot of time to create. What you want to make sure you add texture, pattern, whether that's stamping or stenciling or both. Mix up the scale, large and small. A focal image, some shimmer and shine. And we're going to need a sentiment. Now, because I did the white script there, that's a little too forward, so I'm giving it a wash of Prussian blue. All that's doing is pushing back that white, making it less predominant, so when I put the sentiment on, it doesn't compete with the background. I want to shade around the snowbank as well. You can see the shimmer, that shimmery goodness gives to that page. I love that stuff. The white pearl stencil butter, or pearl white stencil butter, will give the similar effect. It's also yummy pearlescence. Put too much on, you can always take it off. Add a little water. Nothing you do can't be undone. So here, instead of cutting out sentiments from a sentiment pack, I am using my wooden blocks and I'm stamping. I'm stamping into white acrylic paint that I've spread with my palette knife on my glass plate. I love stamping with acrylic paint because if you make a mistake, you have a time to wipe it off. I'm using just one of my wooden blocks, one font, but you can mix and match fonts and wooden block sets. And I'm not trying to make it perfectly straight because, well, I won't. So I was going to put coming gnome for the holidays or gnome for the holidays, but that would have been too many words for this size page. So I went with gnome coming. It's a gnome coming. If you're looking for sentiments that are ready to go, you can check out all my sentiment packs and Ninny's napkins. If you're looking for quotes, go do a search on Pinterest. That's what I do. Make sure you clean those stamps, get that acrylic paint off. I'm loving the shimmer and shine and the movement and pattern on this page. And well, here we go with splatter. I've got white paint on here, so I'm just adding a little bit of water, grab my fan brush, and I'm splattering just to add one more touch to the finished page. The fan brush is key to getting good splatters. Now I'm taking some gold paint on a makeup sponge and I'm lightly rubbing it over the shimmery goodness that I put. It's getting caught on the high points of the texture and just adding another gold shimmer. It's warming up the shimmery goodness. Love that effect. Notice that I didn't do the shading on the snowbank. Got to add that in. Close-ups of the finished page are at the end. Links to the products in the description box below. If you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. It's moved. It's right underneath the description box. And be sure to click the bell so you get notified of upcoming videos. That way you won't miss any of my tutorials. Thank you for joining me for this tutorial. I hoped some of my secrets were new to you. Now go get creative.